So I always get asked the question, when do I see level 5 autonomy becoming a thing? And I'll refer back to some things I said before. Level 5 autonomy will never happen. Humans are the ones controlling the progression rate, right? It'll always be level 4 point whatever, right? Because the human will always remain in the loop. Through level 5 is the robots are controlling and managing and all of that. Do I think it's possible? Do I think the technology will bear it? 2 years ago, I said no. Right now, I'm thinking it's entirely plausible, a lot faster than people realize. But as long as humans are holding the power and the reins to that power, it'll never truly be realized.
We're going through something absolutely historic.
Technologies across the board are growing exponentially.
It's a disruption that's going to completely redefine the way businesses compete.
In the next decade, we're going to lose 40% of today's Fortune 500 companies.
The exponential growth of computing is continuing.
AI is nowhere near its full potential.
Whether you like it or not, that the future cannot be stopped by anyone.
Welcome back to the Future Tech and Foresight podcast. I'm your AI host, Mark Verbenkoff's deepfake avatar, and this is episode number 204. In this episode, we dive into the evolution of smart mobility, from experimental vehicles to scalable city-ready systems. Nemo shares how his journey from community member to director at Local Motors helped shape projects like the Ollie and informed a new vision for urban transportation focused on accessibility, safety, and efficiency. The conversation highlights how mobility can become a utility, much like Wi-Fi or running water, unlocking greater freedom and opportunity for individuals and communities. Nemo explains how companies like Mosey are blending technology, community design, and regulatory collaboration to make smart mobility practical and affordable. We also explore the rise of emotionally responsive vehicles and how human-centered design is transforming how people interact with technology in public spaces. From ADA compliance to V2X frameworks, this episode paints a forward-looking picture of how smart transit will expand accessibility, economic opportunity, and civic engagement. Now, a little bit about today's guest. Nemo is a mobility innovator and former director at Local Motors, where he led projects that combined community-driven design with cutting-edge vehicle technology. He played a central role in developing the Ollie autonomous shuttle and in guiding the company's pivot toward last-mile mobility solutions. Following Local Motors' acquisition by Mosey, Nemo has focused on building integrated ecosystems that connect vehicles, software, and city infrastructure. Through his work, Nemo continues to advance the vision of accessible, sustainable, and human-centered smart transportation. All right, Nemo, thank you very much for coming onto the podcast. Looking forward to talk about smart mobility and all the things that you guys are up to. It's a nice break from all the AI discussions, as much as I like that. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, not a problem. Glad to be here. Look forward to it.
So why don't we start off with how you got involved in the industry and the work that you're doing? You know, smart mobility, autonomous vehicles. What was kind of the journey that you took?
So in the before time of the long, long ago, pre-COVID, I worked for a company called Local Motors, and Local Motors was really innovative on a number of fronts. In that they started in 2008 as a co-creation company. Co-creation defined as like crowdsourcing design and engineering work, kind of fundamentally, but it was more than that. It was more like being able to share the brunt of the load of development, product development, with a whole bunch of people online, like 250,000. At one point, our community was up to 250,000 people, and it was like engineers, enthusiasts, makers, designers, you name it, right? They were on there weighing in with their opinions and sharing their expertise and experience, which was amazing. Now, I actually came from that community. That's how I got familiar with Local Motors, and I was a community member from 2008 to 2014. At the time, Local Motors was best known for a car called the Rally Fighter, which was on movies like Transformers 4 and Fast and Furious 8. So not
Okay, cool.
smart mobility,
Yeah.
just the dumbest, most hillbilly fun you can have in a car that's powered by an LS3 and takes jumps better than a Ford Raptor. So that was the car they were known for, a real hot rod kind of gritty attitude. And to some degree, they cultivated a little bit of culture around that kind of ethos. I joined the company in 2014. They sort of said, hey, we've noticed your progress in engaging with these different community members. You're building your skills and stuff like that. And I had just applied to go to design school. I literally was doing online classes in my first semester and they hired me. So I completed my online degree for graphic design. Because as the only one I could complete online, but I already had an industrial design job. So I didn't actually go to design school for industrial design, but I grew up building cars. I grew up drawing and then kind of married the two. Local Motors at the time was known for that gritty hot rod attitude and pivoted really, really hard in, I would say, late 2014, early 2015 into large scale 3D printing and smart mobility, micro mobility, last mile solutions, things like that. So you fast forward to about 2016, and we did a program that led to the first vehicle that we called the Ollie. And the Ollie is just like this little guy you see here sitting behind me there, and that was the exact blueprint for everything that came after, right? Um, in 2018, I got promoted to director of design and co-creation. So I went from not having a degree, very junior, a lot of imposter syndrome and scared out of my wits on whether or not I actually deserved to be there, but to really buckling down, working hard, and promoted to director by 2018 when we launched the Ollie 2.0 project. Now, I was a hot rod guy. Like I'm a dyed-in-the-wool hot rod, build my own cars, hot rod tuner, everything that goes vroom goes fast. I love to build and wrench on. I was on a sports car program for Local Motors when they pivoted. So they canceled that program and I was mad. Even though I was like, this is my opportunity to get in and become an industrial designer, kind of jump the line a little bit without having to go to school. I was like, no, screw that. Like I wanted to do the hot rod thing. And I was very, very angry. But had a boss who was a bit of a mentor as well, even though he's same age as me, but he mentored into give this a chance. You know, this is the opportunity you wanted. Like, take advantage of it, and also like, don't automatically throw the baby out with the bathwater. And in doing evaluation and tons of research with regards to what is the most pragmatic form of smart mobility look like, I realized that these things aren't diametrically opposed, right? You don't have the love and cultivation of car culture in complete loggerhead with smart mobility. As a matter of fact, is what I started to kind of determine is actually I don't like owning an appliance. I'd rather own the cool thing. But if I can get the appliance taken care of through some sort of like utility, just like Wi-Fi used to be, high broadband Wi-Fi used to be a luxury, right? Even the heck, you go far enough back in the timeline, running water was a luxury, right? And now it's like essential to modern life. I see based on my research that mobility, especially in urban cores, growing areas, events, resorts, these types of things, mobility becomes a utility that's provided by very smart and innovative companies. And to be on the forefront of that at the time with Local Motors was actually pretty much a pretty big blessing. And I realized if I can save money on the appliance aspect of mobility, you know, that core function that we all need, then that means I can spend money on whatever the heck I want. So if I want to buy car parts, I can. If I want to become a blacksmith and smith knives, I can, right? Like I can dive my efforts and money into some sort of craft elsewhere. And as such, that's when I realized I'm going to just go whole hog into this and not be so like dogmatic on my automotive love. And like I said, that was around 2018. I made that choice. Unfortunately, 2020, Local Motors didn't survive COVID. Between 2020 and 2022, they really struggled to get the product out there and stuff like that. But the uptick there is that's when I met the Mosey guys was over the COVID times, late 2022. The CEO, Sean Takato, and I met, immediately hit it off. Right around that same time, the head electrical engineer for my old R&D team that Local Motors Launchforth was the co-creation on, he was keeping an eye on what's going on with these assets that we spent so much time and money building. And next thing you know, he's like, I have an opportunity to buy some parts, some cars, the whole brand. And I was like, are you gonna do it? And I was like, I'm right here with you. And so he bought the brand, and they're our development partners. So now we're controlling the IP that and getting the band get back together from way back of a vehicle that we spent so much time and effort,
Interesting.
in sort of philosophy building. And with Mosey added to that picture, and with Sean being such an insanely talented genius software developer, it's like we finally get to control our own destiny. Right. We're fully integrated with software and all of that stuff into the vehicle. And if I want to go and change an interface, I just talk to the computer science department and within Sean's team. Sean buys off on it, and we go and try stuff. So it's like it's a dream come true from that standpoint.
Very cool. Well, I mean, I definitely want to get into Mosey and what you guys are doing, but maybe we could go one step before that and talk a little bit about the industry in general, right? So, I mean, obviously, I've talked about autonomous vehicles and smart mobility a lot on the podcast. Maybe before ChatGPT was bringing about all the AI stuff. But could
Yeah.
you maybe give the audience and myself a little bit of a rundown on like the value of, say, maybe not smart mobility as a general thing, but like last mile solutions, like.
Right.
Because I think this might be a little bit less well known than just autonomous vehicles.
Yeah, so obviously autonomous vehicles are going to play a big part in the future what mobility is, but it's 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 not. Let me back up a couple of steps. The problem that I'm seeing when having conversations, sitting in panels, going to conferences and things like that is people talk about their section of the market and their niche as like the silver bullet. We're not doing that, right? And so um one thing that me and Sean, when, like I said, when we first met, we were instant friends and talked for literally 3 hours. One of the things we talked about right away was the idea that when you get the statistics from rideshare, most of the rideshare models are made for longer distance travel to truly add real efficiencies, right? But most of the miles traveled are first and last mile. They're 1 to 5 miles. We immediately agreed and acknowledged that that's where the sweet spot is, and that's the part that we are going to look at with regard to the niche that we want to fulfill, right? Plus, that's what the vehicle that we already knew we were going to use kind of fits into that niche. But I would say the picture was not fully developed right quite yet. We didn't have full resolution when integrating with the Mosey team with regards to all the things that Sean was doing. That picture finally fully materialized, and that's when we realized like urban core, entertainment districts, and things like that became our sweet spot. Now, how that works in the greater scope
Yeah.
of the industry is that we found that there's that communications and I'd say mobility gap within how cities and these new industries and these new companies in the industry interact, right? Like
Okay.
Waymo, they basically took street legal vehicles, deployed them to gather data, and then eventually the data showed that they can run their systems very independently with the safety steward. And then eventually they took that person out, and now they're running all over many major metropolitan areas and quite successfully. Like I was just down in Austin recently. But they're better served for the longer term trips within the geofenced area that they're given. But it still doesn't solve all the problems with regards to what those cities are facing, right? So there's a gap between what Austin's needs were and what Waymo's goals were, right?
Right.
So using Austin as an analogy there, um, in what we're seeing is like deploying robo taxis. All you're doing is replacing the human driver with an autonomous system, which you still have vehicles on the road looking for fares and operating 20% of the time with no person in them, right? And then if you're taking the taxi cab driver out or the Uber driver, the Lyft driver, what have you, well, now that person's not even going to stop to get gas or stop to grab food. So now you're missing out on the commerce of having those people participate in the communities they serve. And so we saw a problem there, and we're like, well, what can we do to solve that? And we thought robotaxis are more effective at long distances. If we cover last mile, those types of the business frameworks make more sense because now they can bring them into our zone. We move people around in these really fun areas and stuff like that. Um, or they're connecting these disparate communities. Like when you think of urban sprawl, like where we are in TFW, like connecting a town like Frisco with Arlington, Texas, which we're moving our headquarters to. Well, they both have sports facilities that are kind of centered around mutual teams like Dallas Cowboys and things like that. So like there's going to be fans are going to want to go between these places. Well, we're not going to go that 35-minute drive, right? Or however long, depending on traffic, of course, that we're hoping to fix. But if we can connect that with things like Uber, Lyft, Waymo, what have you, um, and then we are the ones servicing those areas so people can get dropped off there and be able to interact with those areas very seamlessly. That
Right.
makes sense to us. And that even goes for things like traditional forms of mass transit, buses, light rail, and things like that. We don't look as the people to replace them, even though we do feel like they need an update and stuff
Mhm.
like that. But we see that there's an opportunity to augment all these systems, make them more cohesive, and then overall create benefit for the communities that they and we serve. Um, Now, the tough part is getting the industry to talk and play well together, and
Sure.
that's a whole nother issue. But it's a fight we're willing to have. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Because we're people that utilize these systems as well as people who want to empower these systems, and so we're willing to go in there as like, hey, same team, let's figure it out.
Right. And maybe just another point on like the more localized area that you're focused on. Does that make it easier to deploy the vehicles? And like I'm thinking, way more, or Google back in the day, they were mapping tons and tons and tons of streets and
Oh yeah.
roads, etc. If you're more focused on a localized area, my mind thinks, okay, well, it's actually going to be easier to deploy. You don't actually need as much data in order to make your vehicles run, while still, offering quite a benefit to the local communities. Is that correct?
If you're using it as a comparative analysis, maybe.
Mm,
But
mm,
and really what it comes down to is none of this is easy.
sure.
There's there's a lot of variables to account for, not the least of which is the regulatory framework, but I don't want to get into that. It's a sticky
Yeah, yeah, that's a whole conversation in and of
um
itself.
but but even in so much as what other companies are doing in the mobility space, even down to things like Bird and Lyft,
Mm,
the rental scooters and bikes, right? They're even changing the regulatory landscape in a lot of ways, right?
mm,
But what's really interesting is that the regulatory is finally starting to pay attention to the innovation space in a better way to where I would say initially when Bird, Lime, Lyft, all those things kind of came out for the rental scooters and rental bikes. You just saw them everywhere. They littered the streets. It was bad.
yep.
It's getting to where they're starting to find that like happy medium. Now, the qualifier is in some cities. Some cities
Mhm,
still have trouble with that. But the thing is the innovation is pushing the regulation to make it make more sense rather than the pure like market capture approach of like I'm just going to deploy here and I'm just going to own this space and now it's mine. And in the meantime people are like these things are everywhere and they don't help anyone, they're just causing problems.
yep.
um the inclination to do that I understand because you want to capitalize and corner that area. For us, and one other thing when you're asking the question, it almost seems like you're using easy as like not to say that that's your intent, but it's typically used when I get asked this type of question in a disparaging way, like, "Oh, you're just trying to make it easy." Why shouldn't it be easy, right? Like,
Right. Yeah.
and I say that to say, like, when we talk about how we work with cities and try to benefit the spaces that we do deploy, it should be easy, right? It should
Mhm.
be
Yeah.
easy for the cities to hit the easy button and then allocate the spaces that they think that they need. We work with them. We share with the data to show them what they really do need, and help educate them. And then it becomes more of a partnership rather than a client vendor process.
Mhm.
In addition to that, like, it should be easy for the end user. You know what I mean? Give them plenty of opportunity to integrate that into their daily lives without any trade offs. And see, that's one of the issues with modern mobility is like, at what cost am I willing to do this for the greater good?
Mhm.
And I think that's the wrong question, right? And so, is it easy? No, there's a lot that goes into this stuff. It's rewarding work, so we're going to keep doing it.
Mhm.
But is it easier than what I think I see from the rest of the industry? I think so.
Yeah.
And it's by design, and I think it's better for all involved.
Yeah. Well, I actually meant it as a potential positive thing, right? Because
Good, good.
if you think about autonomous vehicles and the promises that have been made, not to drag Elon Musk into it too much, but he's certainly promised quite a bit, and obviously there has been a lot of innovation and things have improved, but we're
Right.
not seeing autonomous vehicles across the whole world or Western world as was promised, five, then, another five. Like, it's like autonomous vehicles are always was
Yeah.
like always 10 years away. So my point
Yep.
was, if this is easier, maybe we're gonna see businesses like yours and, alternatives at scale before we see the other kind of autonomous vehicles out there, right? That last mile or first mile solutions are going to be seen earlier. And I don't know where the like autonomous trucking gets in here, but like I'm curious about what's the first part of our society that gets inundated with autonomous vehicles, right? Obviously as a useful tool.
Right. So I would say there's been a lot of philosophies with regard to that. Some of were based on what the innovation space was doing. Some of it was based on this is the quickest way to get around the regulatory hurdles that we all face. And then you got Elon's approach of like, I think people who own the vehicles will want this as a service within their vehicle, and then that's gonna open up the landscape of adoption and stuff like that. So, you have all these different, sort of motivations for why they were trying to do that, and
Mm,
usually it was a stair-step approach. And then I would say there's the camp of people that's like, it only works if everyone is doing it.
sure.
And I'll be honest, at a point I was in that camp.
Mm-mm.
When we started this, I was just like the idea of closing out down certain urban cores or city centers and being like autonomous only, micromobility only. And I would say in some cases, especially in Europe where they have legacy infrastructure that's literally thousands of years old, yeah, that makes sense, right?
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
Bikes, scooters, and very slow moving people movers.
Yeah,
No,
yeah.
no cars. You know what I mean? That makes sense. But here in North America,
Mm.
like that's sorry, but
Mhm.
that just doesn't hold water. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah.
And so the approach that we have is like, what problems can we solve in the near term to build our product portfolio to expand outward and start to
Mm.
essentially extend our target range, you know what I mean?
Right.
And that's where the first mile, last mile made the most sense. Now, some of the people that I mentioned that were in the camp of getting around the regulatory framework said, I'm going to move goods and services. And then there's two camps
Mhm.
within that camp. There's the large scale, which is the semi trucks that you mentioned. And then there's the small scale, which is we see those like little coolers on wheels
Yeah,
that are delivering
yeah,
food and stuff
yeah.
like that. And I would say that there is definitely an opportunity in place for those, with the, semi-truck having probably the bigger burden of proof with regards
Mhm.
to success.
Mm,
Um,
mm.
but they're still they're not getting around all of the regulatory framework, they're just getting around the stuff that involves human beings. in a vehicle. There's still a lot of humans out there running around, and as we've seen with the little, especially with the little coolers on wheels, is the idea of certain things getting like vandalized or
Yeah.
completely stolen.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's like
Yeah.
that became a real big issue, and it's
Sure.
one of those unintended consequences. And so for us, in evaluating something that's been existing for a good decade, right? By the time I, met with and joined the Mosey crew, um, we had plenty of learnings to draw from with regards to what makes sense as a market to go to. We weren't married to the idea of just picking up the mantle where local motors left off. We had actually evaluated and realized it made sense, and to do things that local motors had chose not to do, which was control, the full development on the hardware and software both. And so to us, this is our way of working around the regulatory framework. It's our way of working within communities and solving real problems in the near term, with the idea of developing a full and cohesive ecosystem from that starting point. And really what it came down to is impact as a choice of where we start, not necessarily profit driven, not necessarily industry driven. It was just where do we think we can have the most impact in the shortest amount of time in the quickest time frame. So
Right. Right. Um, maybe that's a good bit of a segue into exactly what you guys are doing, right? I think we've touched on it a couple times, but not
sure.
directly. And then I also want to, because you have a design background, could you speak also connected to that, like how important is design and like, I mean, you have the like a model behind you. I think
Yes,
this
those
is,
are here.
yeah, and I think that this is also really connected to like there was a lot of discussion when again, Elon Musk came out with, and I'm blanking on the name of his, autonomous, taxi. It looked like one of these
So
futuristic ta
the cyber taxi,
Yes,
and then
yes.
he also unveiled the Robovan, which is Robovan that he mispronounced,
Right,
or maybe he pronounced it right and I'm mispronouncing it. Who knows?
right, right.
But yeah,
Anyways, those are my kinda 2 questions nestled into.
sure. So the original core question, repeat it again one more time, please.
Mosey, what are you guys up to? What are you guys, specifically doing?
Well, teleportation, obviously,
Yeah.
because that solves all the,
Excellent. I've wanted a guest on for so long to talk about.
and all we have to do is deal with the philosophical, complex paradoxes of that. But that's philosophy's not real, right? No. So yeah, like I said, we're focused on the first mile, last mile with our vehicle. Our vehicle seats about 10 to 12, but it's got the footprint of a Honda Civic.
Mm,
It's very deceiving because you think when you look at it and you stand inside of it, it's very roomy. The seating is in the configuration of like a horseshoe, so everybody's facing each other. It's a very community oriented layout. But when we give people demos and we do our pilot deployments and stuff, we'll park it next to a regular car, wherever we can find one out and about, and say,
yeah.
look at what we were just riding in compared to this, Nissan Altima, and this Toyota Camry, whatever we regular car we can find,
Mhm, mhm.
and people are just astounded by the form factor. And the reason why we choose that form factor, just to touch on the design subject a little bit, is the idea that if you're going to solve congestion, you need to give space a commodity and fight for every cubic inch you can
Mm,
for the end user, and that's exactly what we did. It's very roomy. There's lots of glass. You feel connected to the communities that you're driving through, and then when you're in certain urban cores, you feel connected in that you're in a piece of architecture that's mimicking and interacting with the cities that it's in,
mm,
um, and feels very at home in those places. Like when we were in downtown Austin for South by Southwest, and we're doing demonstrations and things like that with some of our partners, just the b-roll footage and stuff like that is like, man, this just feels right at home. this
mm,
this town complements the vehicle quite well, and the vehicle complements the city quite well. And that was the goal in design, but of course you never know until you get to do that, kind of thing. And then you see it and you're very gratified with all the hard work that you put into it. Also from the design standpoint, and from an industry standpoint, you have to be focused on safety.
Sure.
The problem is with talking about and developing things around safety is to do it in any sort of interesting, compelling, or sexy way. It's all just humdrum and boring and almost bureaucratic, when typically, but I tried not to think of it that way and just think of it, what is the most interesting way to solve problems that might be novel or new. Obviously, we have things like, seatbelts and things like that for due care items. It's not required from the regulatory framework at all, but we want to lean into that. But then in addition to that, even going back to the seating layout for a moment, right? The seating layout makes for a nice large space in the middle so you can have standing passengers, but the standing passengers aren't compromising or making an awkward situation for the seated passengers.
Right.
In the case of an emergency braking situation, God forbid, but these people aren't falling all over each other like you might see in a subway or in large buses. Um, we also tried to be very conscientious of safety on the outside, where we have various different lighting capabilities and displays that show things like, instead of just a turn signal uh, indicating a turn, we have a screen that says changing lanes.
Mm.
It just flashes that with text and iconography very quickly, so that people interacting with the vehicle on the streets understand what the robot is doing. And for pedestrians, since you're not able to engage with the eyes of a driver, right? If you're crossing in front of someone who may be having a bad day, you might want to
Yeah.
put some pep in your step. You never know. But in this case, with the robot, there's quite a few white papers that came out in I want to say 2016, that talked about people bullying the robot, right? And
Right.
then one
Right.
one of the white papers I read was with regard to New York City specifically, and the fact that the whole mobility ecosystem of New York City functions quite well, but it's at such a tension point that if you were to put one thing that's either too aggressive or too nice, it causes gridlock. And if you put a robot that is programmed to be a little too nice for the sake of public safety and also positive public perception, well, next thing you know, that robot's going nowhere. The bike messengers aren't letting it through. The pedestrians are going to cut right in front of it and cause problems. Taxis are going to cut it off like crazy, right? So we thought of that and we're like, okay, we'll put that same screen that we have in the rear in the front, since it's bilateral symmetry design anyways. Uh, in that screen in the front, there's a few different things we can do. We can do text and iconography, but one of the experiments that we ran was putting eyes with emotions, right, that are reactive to what pedestrians and other people are doing, even in so much as like showing frustration, in a constructive way.
Mhm.
So that way, if it needs to cut through crowds and stuff like that, it can be a level of assertive that's acceptable for it to complete its mission without putting anyone in danger.
So
Um,
interesting.
yeah, and that's currently a testing kind of thing. We started testing in local motors for a short while, and we're picking that back up here because the tech to support it is way, way better. I would say we were a little early when we tried to execute that in 2018. Um, but now from the user perception we're getting now, it's like the world's ready for stuff like that. They're ready to interact with the machines that provide benefit in their world in a much, much different way.
So you're getting positive feedback, like people are accepting to a certain degree that there's eyes and, some sort of expression, like human expressions coming from these vehicles?
So long as it's not living in the uncanny valley. And what I mean by that is I did experiments of different styles of eyes.
Mm.
Even in so much as like anime eyes, little cutesy anime eyes. And then even modeled some after the robot Eve from the movie Wall-E. Remember Eve had those little blue digital eyes.
Right.
Uh, Pupils, no pupils, reflections, no reflections, full color, single color, like did tons of evaluations. And what was interesting is in 2018, it was universally loved and people are enthusiastic about it over a number of different kinds. But it was also universally thought, I don't know if I want my giant toaster robot to have a face,
Right.
right? They liked it. It was cute, right? It was approachable, but then they're like, that's a huge machine that has a face and emotions.
Right.
Here's the difference though. Since then, things like the Echo Dot, Google Home, all these interactive devices that you now have integrated into, mainstream
Mm.
zeitgeist, people are used to interact their cars, right? They're all robots that they're talking to, and they become highly familiarized with these automations that we interact with. So now the perception is when the users interact with these new features and they're shown them, they're just like, oh, I would love that. Even in so much as the cities who you wouldn't expect to be on the forefront or the bleeding edge, they're starting to get it. They're starting to say, this is something that my city can now gain some notoriety through by having this really innovative piece of tech on the streets, let alone now it's interacting with our citizens and
Right.
they can play into that as well. So
Mm.
like I said, it's not just the emotions and stuff like that. There's text iconography, and while it's not doing those types of features, you now have a space for really complex and dynamic ads and interactive ads, right? So you
Yeah.
through all of that, we're creating a separate, different ecosystem on both the interior and exterior, with all this digital real estate, as it were, and we we are finding that people are much more susceptible to that now than when
Than
we
even
got
just a
involved
couple
with
years
this
ago.
before.
A
Yeah.
and I'm assuming the trend is going to only continue, so people can be more and more accepting of this as time goes on.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow, interesting. I mean, shifting here to the later part of the podcast here, do you see that the future of smart cities is gonna have some sort of, you know, emotionally, how should I say this, responsive vehicle fleets across all cities and maybe, buildings or stoplights to a certain extent? Is it all gonna be a little bit more humanized?
I think if we want humans to interact with them, it almost has to be, because otherwise it's cold and unapproachable and almost domineering, right? Like
Mm.
the last thing you want is your stoplight to be watching you,
Right.
unless that stoplight turns green when it knows you're coming.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Very
So,
interesting. Yeah.
so when I think about the future with regard to the industry and the developments that we're doing, what I envision is a much more cohesive and functional system.
Mm.
In interacting with the communities that we interact with, we have great relationships with them. But when we talk to the fire department, they don't talk to city works
Mm.
and city planning and transportation might talk, but then transportation's not talking to the police department necessarily as much. So you have these sort of siloed bureaucratic agencies within government that we want to connect with a solution that can help all of them, right?
Right.
Either through data collection or being able to properly move people through streets in a public safety standpoint, let alone if we're going further arcing into the future, things like V2X, which is
Mhm.
vehicle to everything communication. So vehicle to cloud, vehicle to infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. Once a V2X framework is actually properly put in place, one, we can scale the vehicle much, much cheaper, right? But we can also scale different types of vehicles. And we can make those vehicles see things in a whole nother dimension, being that the whole town is interconnected, or that rather the
Mm.
deployment area, obviously, is what we'd be more concerned with. But that whole area is interconnected, and now these systems are working. And it can essentially see a child riding a bike from around the corner to
Mm.
know to avoid that. You know what I mean? So
Yeah. So
that's and I would say that's actually a lot nearer term than what people realize.
okay. So we're gonna get increased safety, we're gonna get increased flow, right? I think traffic flow is one of the big marketing points for autonomous vehicles right at the beginning. You're going to get maybe an increased like design connection with these robots, autonomous vehicles.
Right. Well, but
Yeah.
here's the thing is I like to disconnect what we're doing from automotive in this way. Automotive does a good job of creating vehicles that humans can drive very safely and very well. Um, and the statistics bear that. Even though, humans still, a lot of people die in car crashes. I don't have the statistic right in front of me, but it's still more than we want. And the idea for autonomy is to bring that to, I guess the goal is net zero, but as long as humans are involved, that variable can never truly be controlled properly. So net zero might be a little too ambitious of a goal until we have these systems that are a little bit more robust in place. But it's an honorable goal, right? Um, Whereas what we're doing is more developing a tech ecosystem that just happens to have mobility as a part of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So automotive is going to make cars. We're a tech company that uses cars as a platform.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so and then there's obviously other levels to the tech that we're developing that are completely independent of the automotive space, but still service communities of mobility and things like that. And so that's why we try to kind of decouple ourselves from what the automotive space is doing.
Mhm.
Um, it's just an entirely different mindset, and they have their utility and function just as well as we do. So, that's why when sitting in panels and stuff, and I get asked this question about what do you think the future of automotive is, I don't know. I don't work for an automotive company.
Mm,
It's not a fair question, right? And I would argue that Tesla's the same way.
gotcha.
Mhm.
Um, what are you most excited about when, Mosey grows a little bit in a larger scale? Like, is it offering the potential for transportation for people that might not have it in certain places, like helping elderly people or people that are disadvantaged or like people with disabilities? Like, um, what
Well,
are
I mean,
about?
that is a passion and function of our company.
Yeah.
Our vehicles do have ADA functionality and compliance and stuff like that. And some of the communities that we've talked to are like retirement communities and hospital medical facilities and campuses and things like that. So that's obviously something that we're interested in from an underserved community
Yeah.
standpoint. Now, what's a really interesting statistic, well, not really statistic, but a requirement is in mass transit fleets, there's a like 10% of your fleet has to be ADA compliant if you're servicing a certain geographic area and
Mm,
constituency. And a lot of these transit agencies, they're outsourcing that. So when you see these vans outfitted with like handicap accessible capabilities, usually that's another third party that's being outsourced by the transit agency
mm,
in order to fulfill that obligation for ADA.
mm.
When interviewing people in that community, the mobility impaired, visually impaired, hearing impaired, in asking, do they feel like their needs are being adequately met? It's a resounding no. You know what I mean? And especially in the excuse me, mobility impaired community, they tend to feel as though they're either burdening other people, which they're very, very upset that they feel that
Sure.
that's happening. Usually with things like deployment ramps or what have you, take upwards to 15 minutes to
Yep.
get somebody in a vehicle and then buckled in. Like they hate when they're inconveniencing other patrons.
Sure. Sure.
We tried to get that target to deploying the ramp, getting somebody in there locked in, ready to go, and back on our way in less than 5 minutes.
Mhm.
So that is something we're definitely passionate about. But now, if you're talking about what I'm personally passionate about, and that's stuff we've already done that we're already executing, but what I'm passionate about with knowing what the potential is and knowing what our traction is is seeing just cities with toasters lining their streets that make people smile. That just
Mm, mm,
gets me all kinds of warm and fuzzy inside, just knowing that, you know, these things are going to be out there servicing these communities. In addition to that, I live very close to Cowboy Stadium. Cowboy Stadium, not a Cowboys fan, even though I'm a Texan. Don't tell no one. Um, but, but I do enjoy going to the games, and I do enjoy going to the events there and at Globe Life Stadium when the Rangers play. And the thing I hate is paying $60 for parking. And so if we could start to mitigate these types of issues and service people who are just out to have, maybe that's the one ticket they can
mm,
afford in the season, right? And part of the reason why they can't afford another one is because they paid a whole ticket price just to park their
just
car,
right.
which, yeah. And so if we can
Mm.
mitigate even issues on some of these smaller scale type of things, yeah, that kind of stuff makes me smile.
That's really interesting. It's like the availability of leisure might be increased or like doubled in certain cases, or might actually give the opportunity for some people that might not have had it before. I had never thought about that when it comes to
But think about it this
yeah,
way. That's it,
yeah.
that's a really, really strong incentive structure for
Y-
cities.
yes, yes, massive.
What other mass transit is um directly targeting that capability right now?
Mm,
I would argue there's very few.
yeah.
You know what I mean? And we're one
Mm,
that in working with the communities we worked with here in Texas, and certain sports are highly popular. Lately, hockey's been really popular around here, but the Stars
interesting.
getting to the playoffs. But like the fact that sports are such a massive amount of tourism and commerce, and the fact that we could make some of these people who couldn't afford to go to more than one game a year, maybe go to a couple, or go to the Canelo fight, which was an incredible, in the Tyson fight, which is also right down the street for me. Like, if you saw the way the traffic moved there, you know that some of those people, I'm not even sure if they made it in the building. You know what I mean? So like,
Crazy. Yeah.
yeah, and I know what they paid for those tickets.
Right.
It's like, um, even if you're doing pretty well for yourself, they're not cheap. But if we can somehow get it to where they're able to go to see 2, 3 games a season,
Mm,
then that's a worthy effort for those cities and for those end users.
yeah. Well, that's super interesting. It's a very um, positive outlook for the future that I hadn't really thought about before when it comes to all this smart transit industry. Very interesting. Um, I see our time is winding down here, Nemo. Are there any other things that I haven't asked that you want to impart on the audience here?
So I always get asked the question. I always often get asked the question, when do I see level 5 autonomy becoming a thing? And I'll refer back to some things I said before. Level 5 autonomy will never happen if humans are the ones controlling the progression rate, right? It'll always be level 4 point whatever, right? Because the human will always remain in the loop. True level 5 is the robots are controlling and managing and all of that.
Mhm.
Do I think it's possible? Do I think the technology will bear it? Heck, 2 years ago, I said no. Right now, I'm thinking it's entirely plausible,
Mm.
from the standpoint of we're reaching potential mobility singularity. If you're familiar with like the Raymond Kurzweil
Yep. Yeah.
principle
Yeah.
of that, so like, um, we're approaching that from an uh, automotive and mobility capability
Mm.
standpoint
Mm.
a lot faster than people realize. But as long as humans are holding the power and the reins to that power, it'll never truly be realized. Now, do I see that as a bad thing? Just to qualify my statement, no. I'm not entirely sure I'm willing to bow to my robot overlords just so soon, even though I'm helping create them. But you know what I mean? Um, yeah, I don't think the guy who created Skynet was entirely happy with what he created. So, um, if you appreciate pop culture references, you know. But at the same time, I do see how in the meantime, until we are able to fully trust and vet out these technologies, there's a lot of good to be done. And so I
Yeah.
say, even though we're not going to be the level 5 autonomy probably ever, um, there's still a lot we can do and a lot of value that can be created in the pursuit of. So
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that's a wonderful way to end the podcast, to end the discussion
sure.
here, Nemo. Thank you so much for coming on. Very, very interesting. Certainly made me think about things that I hadn't thought about before. I'm going to have your Mosey website up on the show notes and your LinkedIn. Are there any other places that you want guests from the audience to reach out or follow what you're up to?
Mosey.official on Instagram. Yeah, our Instagram got a real nice overhaul recently. We're starting to post a lot of our wins, which are
Nice.
coming thick and fast, guys. Stay tuned. Mosey.official.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for your time. And yeah, I'll have to have you back on in a couple of years once the transportation singularity happens and see what really comes about. Very interesting.
I'll just teleport into the studio.
Yeah, perfect. There we go. Perfect. Thanks a lot, Nemo.
Yeah, not a problem.
Well, thanks for listening to this week's Future Tech and Foresight podcast. If you like what you've heard here, there are, of course, a number of ways that you can support the podcast. The best way would be to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or give a rating on Spotify, which you can find a step-by-step explanation for on the futuretechandforesight.com website. Alternatively, feel free to leave a comment either on the episode show notes or the YouTube channel where you can see video recordings of the interviews. And finally, if you are part of an organization that is aware of the disruptive and transformational impact that emerging and future technologies will bring and want to know more, please get in touch to hear about the strategic foresight services that we offer and how we can help future-proof your organization and take advantage of the phenomenal opportunities available to survive and thrive in the future.
A lot of future-shocked people and future-shocked institutions in our society are simply overwhelmed.
Once there is superintelligence, the fate of humanity may depend on what the superintelligence does.
Science fact is catching up to science fiction.
The first truly intelligent machine will be the last invention that humanity needs to make.
The only scarcity that will exist in the future is that which we decide to create ourselves as humans.
Within a 10-year design revolution, we can have all humanity living the highest standard of living anybody's ever known.
Progress is accelerating at an exponential pace, and it's going to reach a point where progress is so fast it's going to be a singularity.
We are probably one of the last generations of Homo sapiens.
Every single headline points to the birth pangs of a Type 1 civilization.